Hey guys, we're back with another video here, and in this short video, this should be a short one, we are looking at physics within Unity. And again, we could get into a lot more complicated talks about physics and how they work, but enabling physics in Unity is relatively simple. So you'll notice right now from our last video, if I go into game view, my objects are just kind of floating above this plane. And something you can check out up at the top here is this play button. All right, you got a pause button as well, and you can actually step forward if you wanted to. And that's if you have a really, complex scene or whatever. But if you go play up here, it'll actually compile and show you the game running. Okay, and you can tell right now it's running because the play button is playing, but there's nothing happening. Let's say, for example, we were looking at a game where guards were sort of pacing back and forth, or maybe a ball was rolling. We would see all that right now. But because nothing is happening, we've just placed these objects and they're floating in space, nothing is really going on. Remember, this is very important. I cannot stress this enough. Don't forget that when you press play, to press it again to stop it. Because if you start making changes in here while you're in the play menu, it is only for the preview here, and as soon as you unclick play, all those changes are lost. So unclick play, it'll take you back to your scene sort of overview. And I want to talk a little bit about colliders and physics, and we are definitely going to be going into more information or more detail on this later on. You'll notice on each of our objects, along the right-hand side, we have these different sort of headings that are called components, okay? These components are the different things that make up the objects that we are putting into Unity, all right? And in the components themselves, you will notice at the bottom that it has a collider. And a collider is a component that tells Unity where we will come in contact with this object. All right, so you'll see that on the plane it has a mesh collider, and this mesh collider, if we were to look at it, is covering the entire object. Okay, if we go to the sphere and we click on the collider, we can turn it on and off, by the way, so we can actually see it. You will see that it is encompassing the entire sphere. It is a sphere collider, it is a circular collider, and it covers the entire object. This one is a box collider because it is a box, and it is covering the entire object, like I said. If we turn off the other sort of components like that, if you just click the checkbox, you can actually see the collider by itself. All right. Anyways, you can see that that area, depending on the type of object we have, uses a different collider. So the cylinder uses a capsule collider. Now at any point, if we say, you know what, this is the wrong type of collider, we don't want this type of collider, or if maybe we want to change the collider or edit it, you see there's an edit option, we can do that from this window here. We can also go over to these three little dots and remove that component. If let's say this box, we can't collide with it. It's just going to allow us to go right through it. Then we would get rid of the collider. It wouldn't need it. But by default, Unity will add a collider to the objects that come into it, especially the ones that are built within Unity. This is not important yet, but it's important to understand that colliders exist. Because when we apply physics to our objects, what it looks at is the collider that's attached to that object. So let me show you what I mean. Our cube right now, like I said, is simply, they're all floating in space. But let's say we wanted the cube to fall and react to gravity as it should, or as it would in the real world. What we can do is down here at the bottom, with the cube selected, is we can add a component. And you're going to find in this list that there are tons of components that we can add. All right, it's easier to just search for the component that you want, okay, because there are a lot, hundreds, I would say. In order to add physics to something, we would add what's called a rigid body. And a rigid body is used also in 3D programs as well to basically tell it that this object is a physical object and it is going to react to the world that it is inside of. So from the rigid body asset, after we add it, you can see that it adds a rigid body component to the list. From there, we can change how heavy the object is, how much drag it has, does it use gravity? All these things in here that allow us to control how this object reacts to the world that it's inside of. Now watch what happens when we hit play. When we hit play and it builds the world, you will see that the cube will drop. The cube will fall out of the sky. All right, so let's watch that again. I could have just hit, yeah, it's okay. You can see that the cube will fall. And the reason the cube falls is because we've added rigid body to it. And the reason it stops when it gets to the plane is because it is making contact between its collider and the plane's collider that it has. So the mesh collider and the box collider are making contact, and it is stopping the box from falling through. We could do the same to all these other objects, okay? So if we do it really quick, we add a rigid body to each of these, you will see that each one will react the same way if we hit play. They all hit the ground, they all make contact with the plane, and they're all resting on the plane itself. Now here's something funny. If we add a rigid body to the plane, which I don't recommend doing, but let's do it as a test, what do you think is going to happen? Obviously, the plane will now have gravity and they will all fall, which doesn't make any sense. So let's remove the rigid body from the plane. Let's go over to these three dots and just remove that component so that only the plane has a collider that these three rigid bodies are now coming into contact with. And there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. You know, if you have a cube, let's say, let's make a duplicate of a cube. I can use Option here and drag a copy of another cube here if I want. Let's just do it this way. Okay. Oh, that didn't work. So let's actually just copy it. Right click and copy and paste it here. And what it'll do is it'll paste it directly over top of the other one. That's fine. Okay, you can name your components here, but for now we're just going to use the basic naming. Now watch what happens. It's got all the same components as the other one. We're going to bring this one up and maybe a little to the side like this, so that when it drops, it's going to make contact with the collider on this block and the sphere, if everything works according to plan. Now we can hit play and let's see what happens. There you go, exactly what you would expect. The blocks fall and make contact just like you would expect in the real world. And that is a fantastic feature of Unity, is that it comes with a really excellent built-in physics system that you can apply to objects really quickly. And the colliders work really well most of the time. Sometimes they don't work as you'd expect. But generally speaking, they work really, really well. The next thing we're going to look at in our next video is to create a player object that we can actually start to control. And that is going to allow us to actually start interacting with the world that we are creating. So stay tuned for that.